Brittany, am I good to go?
You are good to go.
Perfect.
I'm gonna leave everyone else's microphones on though, so that they can ask questions of you, Mitchell.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, it's a small group, so that totally works. And I mean, ultimately, I might not even keep the PowerPoint. I guess if just depending on how many people really wanted to see pictures. Let me get this.
You're good to go.
All right. Okay, cool. So yeah, my name's Mitchell. I definitely really excited, even though there's only a few of us on. So a little bit of background about me. Yes, I used to work down in Fresno. I was the retail manager for Vino, now Vino Grill and Spirits, and then went on to be a supervisor at Total Wine. That's when I got the chance to meet Brittany and start doing wine classes at Harlan Ranch. And then I left. I got an opportunity to go work in Carmel Valley in Monterey County and run a winery over there. And that was great. And as they say, when it rains, it pours. I actually then about 10 months later got an opportunity to move up to Sacramento on the distributor side and take over and be an account territory manager. So I run a territory now all the way from Fairfield, Sassoon, all the way down to Turlock with Sacramento in the middle. On the distributor side. So I work primarily with high-end restaurants, hotels, some very independent specialty retail, but I've got some Michelin star accounts, everything to, very humble, like mom and pop, boutique restaurants, which is really, really fun. So that's just kind of where I'm at. And I'm just happy to be able to come and talk about wine. I just love it. And I mean, with quarantine and everything going on, I mean, it's a great way that Zoom is given us the ability to do this. I'm assuming no one has any questions on that. I have a not so, boring intro.
No, it sounds really fun.
I mean, I will say I am quite lucky ultimately I'm almost 30 and I've done a lot in the business. So it's been a fun roller coaster. So it sounds like some of you are drinking wine on a regular and then not so much. You're looking to get some good recommendations. So we're going to kind of go through the whole caveat here. Everything from, does everybody know what wine is? Like, we all understand that it is fermented grapes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's just the very rudimentary basic concept of wine. I mean, they've been doing this since the Romans. They've actually proven that China was the first part of the world to ever have wine. Dating back 700 BC, which is before the Romans technically had it. But over the years, we've developed so many different styles and so many different flavors and so many different ways of understanding what wine really is from, that time. And then the churches took over and it was definitely mostly just commune wine to now we've got the sophistication of, 3 or 4 different options of wine if we want to pick out of our wine cellar or our refrigerator. Is anybody drinking wine with me tonight, or am I the only one sipping on something?
No, here we are.
Yeah, we got it.
All right, what's everybody sipping on here?
Well, you can tell them.
We're doing Tobin James called Private Stash. It's a blend of 2 different kinds of Cab and Merlot.
Okay, perfect. And when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see you guys, so I'm basically just, oh, there we go. Now I can.
Steve muted
okay.
himself. I don't know if he's drinking, and then I don't get to drink until this is all.
Nope, you're off limits there, Brittany. Steve, you sipping on anything tonight?
Oh, you're gonna have to unmute yourself, Steve. I muted you for a second because we could.
I'm sipping on water.
Oh,
Me too.
I'm a pretty big teetotaler, but like I said, I'd like to know what to get other than Trader Joe's $2 chuck when I have company over. So
perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I'm sipping on a nice crisp wipe. I mean, it's hot outside. I spread the wealth between whites, reds, rosés, bubbles all the way around. It just depends on what I'm in the mood for. So that kind of leads in types of wine. Judy, you guys are drinking a big red, Paso Robles. I'm guessing it's about 15.5, 15.6 in alcohol, bigger red, nice.
yeah.
Right.
That area, develops a really big, bold fruit style of wine. I mean, it's hot in Paso.
Mhm.
I ran into some people actually the other day up here in Sacramento that they're like, oh yeah, Paso coast. It's nice and cool there all the time. I'm like, you do understand Paso isn't on the coast. It's set back a little bit, and it does get up to 110 in Paso. So it is kind of crazy, even in our own state, people not knowing the geography really and understanding that cool climates will induce very cool style of wine. So very high acid, very racy, very lean, versus warmer climates are going to give you very much more of that fruit forward, big, bold, voluptuous style of wine. And so that's kind of, one of the big things I always think about is where the wine's coming from. So Steve, you were asking, wine to get for company or friends. The biggest thing is, we're going to kind of get into that now, is starting looking at your labels and understanding where that wine is, and that will kind of give you the style of wine based on the type. So it's kind of a trickle down domino effect ultimately. And then you could always, if worse comes to worse, if you don't want to look at labels or whatnot, you could always grab something popular. Cab is always king in California. There's more Cab grown in the entire world than any other varietal, so you can never go wrong with Cab.
Where in California has the best Zin?
So it depends on who you're talking to. Paso, that area will definitely tell you that their Zin is king. But Zin actually, in the state of California, the original planting of Zin traced all the way back up into Amador County, up here in the Sierra foothills up north.
Okay, that's where we get it when we get it.
That's where we usually get our Zin, yeah.
Yep. So there's traced plantings that date back, that are still in production today in Amador County, but dating back to 1857, that are still producing wine commercially. I love a lot of Zin out of Sonoma because it's a very cool climate. And for me, I like very lean, very racy kind of Zin. I grew up in the Amador, Somerset, El Dorado County area, so I grew up with those Zins and I love them. But I mean, those to me that's my prime rib kind of, spicy Zin.
Mm-hmm.
And then just so you guys know, all these pictures are just my pictures of stuff I've had the opportunity to taste and enjoy. Everything from Nicolas Flamel, their Palme d'Or. This is their 1999 vintage bottle. Trimbox Pinot Blanc, Minuti, which I actually have a bottle of that tonight. Rosé out of France, and then Saint-Supré out of Napa, their Dollar Hide. So these are all just way different wines from different regions. And
what is the name of the French rosé?
Chateau Minuti.
Okay.
From what part of France?
I definitely have the worst pronunciations in the world for French. I was one of the 90s babies left behind in school districts, so I have a hard enough time with English. But Minuti is a great producer, and we'll kind of talk about some of the wines that I have, just so you guys get an understanding. But yeah, so understanding what we're buying and, what to buy. Where do you guys shop for wine?
We go to the wineries. We just buy a case when we like it. Yeah.
There you go. Do you guys ever do Total Wine tastings?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, Total Wine, if we're going to go get some somewhere, that would be the place we would go. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, they really do a great job of providing opportunities for people to taste before buying with their tasting.
Oh, yeah, we've tasted there many times, yeah.
I mean, and for the California state law of a penny, why not?
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, there's always great places. I love the market over off West and Herndon. They do a really good job and curate a great wine selection in Fresno
we've never
as
even
well.
been there.
Absolutely, and really great prices. Honestly, their prices are amazing. What's it? Pastrami sandwiches down off Clinton and the Italian. Sam's Deli.
Sam's Deli, yeah.
You can go talk to Nick. Him and I think her name was Heidi. They do a really good job as well. They have wines from all over the world. And, these places I bring up, obviously California, we're in California, and California wines, trust me, hands down, I love. But it's always great to taste wines from all over the world. It gives you a little bit more robust understanding of what your palate even might like. So that kind of leads into reading labels, because getting wines from all over the world is kind of intimidating, because you don't read the language. If you do, that's awesome, but sometimes you don't understand what the label even has on it. So for instance, there's a couple bottles on here. This first one right next to the text, this is a bottle out of Hungary. Hungary produces a wine called Tokai. That's actually the region over there. Most wine in Europe or the old world is going to be labeled off their region. And then you'll have the producer itself. So Royal Tokai is the winery, and then the vintage, and then some of the other laws that are required for getting brought into America, like the alcohol percentage. On the backside, it will have, don't drink if you're pregnant, contains sulfites. This comes out of Hungary. But, you know, some of the labels that we see a little bit more, like this one in the middle, this is out of Bordeaux. Chateau Galland is the actual house. That's the winery itself. Saint Julien is the commune. But until you don't know what Saint Julien is, unless you really know, like, Bordeaux. So until you turn the back label, then you'll understand that that's the region. But if there's no back label, you just kind of have to, it's a guessing game until you know, which is the worst but most honest answer I can give. And then, you know, Grand Vin, that just means it's a great wine for them. In Bordeaux, you can be 1855 classified, so you could be a first growth or second growth. You can be one of the growths, but that will then be on the label, vintage, and then this is bottled at the chateau. So this is an estate bottling. And then this last one over here, this is a bottle of champagne. Champagne is actually, in my opinion, some of the most progressive on their labels. Lanson is a great producer. If you ever get a chance, if you like bubbles, I highly recommend them. But they tell you full out, you know, where Lanson's pulling it, what vineyards. Champagne is a designated region, just like Bordeaux. And this is even more getting more common, because most people, you know, you buy a bottle of sparkling. Well, when did that bottle of sparkling become a bottle of sparkling? So now they have the disgorgement date, which basically means that's where they put the primary, the last stopper on, like the last cork. So they get rid of the lees. They are done with the process. It's now just cellaring time. So that's a great way to know how long the bottle's been ready to consume at that point. Any questions on that at all?
Talk to me about tannins.
Yeah, so that was we're actually going to kind of get into that here.
Oh, okay. Well, then wait till you
so yeah, the composition and makeup of wine kind of gets into what you're getting out of your bottle. There's tannins in everything. There's less tannins in white wines and rosé, but every wine has tannins. Tannins are histamines that come up from the actual pigments of the skins of the grapes. So any wine that has any kind of skin contact, so red wine or orange wine, that's getting really popular nowadays, that's going to have tannins. And tannins are basically the organic compounds that dry out your mouth. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people right now that have the stigma that tannins are what give them hangovers and get them headaches, and they're allergic to tannins. They've actually done many studies throughout years. No one is allergic to tannins. People are allergic to the histamines, and people are allergic to sulfites. Tannins, though, do dehydrate you. So yes, most people, if they drink a good bottle of red wine and don't drink any water, they're going to be hungover the next day because they're dehydrated. And that's just, you know, the way it is, because, and especially the bigger the red, you know, if you're drinking Pinot, those are a little bit softer because Pinot is a little bit more thin skinned, but Cabernet, Zin, those are thick skinned grapes. So they impart a ton of particular and a ton of histamines into that wine. And that's why you get bigger reds, you know, those big, bold looking colors. Does that answer that question for you?
Well, why are some, like I could have a Zin that feel, it's really, I mean, I can feel it in my mouth. I can feel the tannins. I don't like it so much. And I can have a Zin that's perfectly wonderful. And so what's the difference? What makes one way and one another?
So it all comes down to the winemaking practice. If we're taking Zin on a common way, say I'm making a Zin and you guys are making a Zin. In my winemaking practice, I'm choosing to try and leave it up to as natural as possible. So I'm not doing any kind of cap management, which is basically when all the grapes are fermenting, punching down the clusters and stirring everything up. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just letting it sit. You guys are doing a lot of cap management. You're doing punch downs, you're doing pump overs. So basically you're circulating the juice over and over again on top of the skins. The more contact that you impart, the more those tannins are going to get into the wine. If I'm just, letting it sit and doing its own fermentation, its own natural kind of filtration on its own, it's not going to be as firm as rough tannins. Another thing that people don't think about as much is the pips, the seeds of the grapes. Those actually impart a lot of bitter tannin. So if a winery is pressing and crushing and they're crushing those seeds in with the wine, that's releasing a lot of that bitter tannin from the seeds itself. So that's what gives you that really astringent,
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
that clarifies it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one step. The next step is, how it's oak aged, or if it's not oak aged. If my Zinfandel is in stainless steel, that's not going to impart any outside flavors. Oak can instill tannins on top of that. Between the interaction of the wine and the barrels, with the barrel absorbing the wine and imparting flavor, barrels have tannins in their own. The vanillas and the vanillins and the resveratrols, those are all different tannin compounds. So there's tons of ways to get tannins. It's ultimately up to the winemaker to curate a wine that is balanced. Like you said, you can take some wines that tannins are silky, they're smooth, nice and velvet, amazing. And then there's others that hit you like you just got slapped in the face by a whoopee cushion or something.
Exactly.
So yeah, and that's why we taste wine though, because everyone's palates are different. I might love a wine that has that rugged, peppery, just tannin finish, and like you want something very smooth. So the more we taste, the more we understand what we're really looking for. And that ultimately then can even go into how it's being served, your glassware, your decanting. If you're decanting a wine, why are you decanting it? I would always decant a big Bordeaux, a big Cab, a big Zin, because it does let it aerate a little bit, which that oxygen gets into all the wine particles throughout and actually spaces it out. So it does release some of those tannin particles against one another. Versus, a nice, easy white wine, I don't necessarily need to decant that because there's no skin contact from the tannins. To me, my biggest worry with white wine is how cold it is, because a lot of people tend to over chill their white wines. That's great if we're drinking. I might trash a couple brands here, so no one hopefully will get mad at me. But if you're drinking Barefoot Moscato,
I hope not.
I'm gonna throw that in the freezer as long as I can before it turns into a slushy, just so it's cold and I don't have to taste as much. Versus a nice balanced, Chablis out of France, or or the white that I'm drinking currently. I want that at that nice, 45 to 50 degree temperature. So it's chilled, but I'm still getting aromatics. I'm still getting all the balance and flavors out of my wine. So that kind of gets into another thing. Steve, Judy, do you have it? Has anybody ever gone through the tasting steps on how to taste wine?
Yeah. We've taken a couple of wine classes. In fact, when we travel Europe, that's one thing we always do is take wine classes, and they always do that with you.
Yeah, you always, everyone's got their own little name. Steve, have you had the opportunity to taste anything at all?
It's been ages ago, so.
Okay, we can kind of run through it just to kind of give everybody an update. So me, I try and keep it as simple as possible, because at the end of the day, we're not trying to cure cancer. We're enjoying wine. And everyone's palate's a little bit different. So everyone's going to understand and, interpret it just a little bit differently. I look at it in a couple step process. So I look at appearance, how the wine looks by just looking at it. If it's got different kind of opaly looks throughout the glass, it's either the glass isn't washed properly, there's like soap residue, or the wine hasn't fully fermented, or it's just got some particular, if it's cheaper wine, like say Woodbridge Mondavi Chardonnay, they're throwing a bunch of artificial flavoring and a lot of artificial additives into it. It's separation. My next is smell, so my S, and after my swirl, that's when I'm getting 60% of my aromas and my flavors is actually through my nose. I always swirl gently. It's not like a, throw it through the dishwasher kind of swirl, just to release those aromas out of the glass, just to kind of force them out. And, I take a few sniffs, and that's going to give me my initial judgments before I taste. And once I taste, that's going to kind of finish out my preliminary examination of the wine. And the tasting is always the most fun. And yeah, and then at that point, you're able to decide if it's something you like or not. Granted, we can sit around and discuss, flavor profiles of what you're expected to get from a Zin, a white, a rosé, a bottle of bubbles. Red wines are always going to impart red fruits, just because, again, the skin contact. Red fruits, blue fruits, black fruits. It's just a matter of the oak then and how much of those secondary flavors like vanilla, coffee, tobacco, those flavors are going to come in.
Don't forget leather.
The tasting is, it can get pretty intense. When I was taking one of my tests and doing blind tastings, you're asked to do everything from describing the appearance, the smell, the flavor, the ageability of the wine. And that's great, especially when I'm talking to clients, restaurants that have cellars. But, if you're just having a conversation with some friends, in my experience, most of my friends get bored of me trying to talk wine more than the first 4 or 5 seconds. And they're like, can we just drink wine and enjoy it and talk about something?
They glaze over, huh?
Yeah, it's just like, hey, well, yeah, we're drinking great wine and I really like this flavor.
And I'm not sure what leather tastes like anyway, yeah.
But that's, it's so funny that you bring that up, because smell and taste is so much based on your memory and your history. If you've never eaten, I hope no one's ever eaten leather, but if you've never smelled like fresh leather, how are you going to know what it tastes like? If you've never had a watermelon, how are you going to know that rosé is going to impart that watermelon like bouquet and that aroma? It's very personal, and unfortunately, but fortunately, I've had a good amount of people that have told me I've tasted and smelled things wrong. And then it's like, well, unless you and I are the same person, I don't need your negativity. So go stand in your own corner.
There is no wrong.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer. Now that only goes so far. Again, if you're testing and you're doing it like on an exam level, like if I were to say on my white wine that I'm getting blueberries and blackberries, my examiner is going to look at me like I'm out of my mind.
Yeah, well, that is wrong.
But, something like, say, champagne, that is still a white wine, but it's made out of Pinot Noir or Meunier grapes, which are red skin, even though it's pressed off. And so it's a white wine. And depending on the age to it, it still could impart some of those red candy fruits. But that's a completely different category of wine. So it's just, another trick to know. For like this bottle specifically, it's Chardonnay and Pinot Noir blend. And this very much so after sitting over for a while, especially letting it open up a little bit, has that very like toffee, like caramel, like cherry kind of flavor in a very lively way. Did I answer everyone's questions on tasting?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, yeah, what to serve it in. White wine for me, I'm pretty open to a lot of, whatever glass you have available to make it work, especially at home. I really do like these glasses. These are Pinot and Burgundy glasses. They're a little bit shorter versus Cabernet glasses. They're a little bit deeper. because of the aromatics. So most white wines and rosé, I'll always drink out of Burgundy glasses versus once I get into either champagne even or big reds, I'll do something with a little bit longer of a vessel bulb because I want the aromas to go straight up versus kind of wafting out in a shorter. But again, it all depends on who you're talking to, what you want to accomplish, and who you're entertaining. If like my mom came over, I'd be, Mom, here's a stemless glass, because I know if you have a stem glass, you're going to knock it over in 5 minutes, and we're out of wine and we're out of glass.
Mitchell,
What do you
can
think
I-
about stemless?
Oh, yeah. I love stemless because there's a time and a place for it. Stemless to me is very versatile because I actually do a lot of sake as well, and these are great for sake.
Mitchell, I'm going to ask a very novice question.
Perfect. Go for it.
Why is it that they usually serve champagne in like a very tall fluted glass?
Great question. And the reason because of that is because champagne, when you pour it into a very skinny, narrow vessel, those bubbles and those aromatics are going to go straight back once it bounces in the middle. If it's too wide, then it will dissipate too quickly. They want, especially with presentation, it's mostly presentation. They want the bubbles for the mousse and the effervescence to go straight back up, right back into your nose. Back in the 50s, the coupe was really popular. I love coupes. I think they're elegant. I think they're absolutely sexy. But
What's a coupe?
they're very wide, very short. So think of like a martini glass almost.
Oh, it's a regular
I think-
old-fashioned champagne glass, right?
Okay.
Yeah, they're the old school. They're wider. They've got a
We
little,
have those.
almost like a margarita glass.
Yeah.
Think of like the Great Gatsby, the glasses. From
Yeah,
the Great
exactly.
Okay.
I think they look sensational, but they just let the aromatics just completely blow out. So if
Yeah,
you're-
here's one right here.
Exactly. So
Oh,
if you're
okay. I've seen those
really
before.
wanting to get the primary, secondary, and tertiary flavors out of that champagne, you're not going to in the coupe. The coupe is just for elegance and just for,
Okay.
versus the flute is going to give you everything in a very direct path.
Cool.
The reason why I drink though champagne out of like a cab glass is because it does have that very linear send off for the aromas, but it also has a wide enough bulb down below for it to kind of get the aromatics in there. So to me, this is the best of both worlds because champagne truly does have a lot of flavors on a secondary back end that it impart, but it doesn't impart when you're just drinking straight out of a flute because the appearance and everything's just shot right back out.
Wow, it's good to know.
Cool.
Big champagne fan. I love bubbles in general. So I probably will bring them up more than most people ever want to. Don't need this time to celebrate. Just they're great food pairing wines too. So on this, I was lucky enough to be able to go to Ridge and taste some of their wines directly from their vineyards. So this is one of their bottles specifically from the Pepperone vineyard. The reason why I'm bringing this up is kind of based, and then the secondary picture here is a couple different bottles of Bordeaux, different vintages. The reason why I bring this up is basically to show you the different wine openers. So you've got your standard wine key, which is tried and true. You've got your fancy tools like your Corvin, and then you've got a whole plethora of different wine openers, the hinge. So Steve, again, like people coming over, question of how to open it is always coming up into play. I would ultimately use whatever you're most comfortable with. These are extremely simple, so it doesn't take a lot of hard work or.
This tells you how basic I am.
Okay, well,
There
I
you
mean,
go.
again,
It works. There you
if
go.
it works, then don't break
works.
it.
Exactly. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. If you ever do get to a point where these are amazing, I absolutely love the Corvin unit. I use this on a very regular basis, especially when I am tasting wine out for work, as well as just at home if I want to taste like a wine club shipment. I want to see how my vintages are progressing. Not all wine is made to age, and so this just kind of shows myself, the proof that. Any questions on anything so far? Am I doing okay?
Yeah, awesome.
All right, next slide here.
Yeah, that one. Oops.
Did I already skip one? No. All right. So Brittany and I were talking earlier this week. Food and wine is always a big thing. And I know at Harlan Ranch, the last time I came, the spread was amazing. The cheese, the wine, the different fruits, the crackers, the different spreads. And so, and this is just how our society is, you know, like I want to have people over. I want to not only have good food, but I want to make sure I have a good wine to go with it. And so I'm going to very shortly put it at the very top of the list out of everything, no matter who says what. Wine will pair with whatever you think it will based on your palate at the end of the day. Like if you think that a big red is going to go with fresh oysters, knock yourself out. That's what you think you want. And I actually have had some really big cab out of Santa Barbara that went really good with a fried oyster po' boy. And it was pretty sensational. I had no clue that it would work, but that's just ultimately, I want to make sure that, you know, because I have had snobs come into my own home and go, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. That's not the way you're supposed to pair that. And it's like, yeah, sorry, dude. Like, this is how I think it works. So, but just know that, you know, big cab with steaks, you know, that's always your classic, especially because we're coming into the summertime here. You know, barbecues are big. I know in Fresno it's 110. No one wants to be outside and barbecuing right now. Utilize your stove and everything as much as possible. So, I mean, Italian with meatballs, marinara, a couple of just tricks though, for sensory flavor wise. High acid foods, so like tomato based sauces, do go really well with high acid wines. That's why that classic pairing of Chianti Sangiovese with pasta sauce is so set in everyone's brain, and it will always forever be, because that's that perfect acid to acid balance. You know, any big Italian red wine actually is always great for high acid. You've got Brunello, you've got Barolo, you've got Chianti, you've got Montepulciano. Any of those are going to have high acid. So any kind of high acid food. But kind of going on that though, any kind of food that has really big umami, so like that savory flavor, you really don't want to go super high in acid on your wine. Otherwise, it's just going to be way too bitter. So you want something with a little bit more fruit on your wine, just so that that savory flavor of the food and the wine will kind of sync up. Fatty and salt, those will be great for bringing out the freshness, the liveliness, the acid again on your wine. That's why down here in this picture, I did French fries and Cajun style shrimp with a bottle of bubbles. It was absolutely glorious. You know, the shrimp and that spice from the Cajun with that saltiness of the French fries went really good with that acid, but that creaminess of the wine. Pinot's always great pairing for the summertime. It's not too big of a red. What do you guys like pairing? What are some of your guys' favorite wine pairings?
I think we probably do more of the standard kind of things, like a rosé with our fish and our in the summertime, a rosé with our fish and our chicken. And
we never did rosé for a long time because most rosés seem to be too sweet. And then when we found the dry rosés, then
from
we
France,
really liked them.
the French rosés, the dry
French
ones.
dry
Yeah.
ones. So,
You know, it's when I was working at Total, it blew my mind how many people that still had in their mind when you said rosé, they still thought white blush.
White
like
Zinfandel, yeah.
yeah.
And it just cracks me up because France, Provence, even parts of Italy, you know, with Saunier style Pinot Grigio, like they've been making rosé longer than this country has existed. And white
very
blush,
different.
the Gallows did a great job of marketing that white blush, and then Trincheros did a great job of making that white Zinfandel. Hats off to them for that, ultimately.
Well, I got a lot of people drink wine that didn't before. So.
True. I mean, again, white Zin though was Bob Trinchero. That was his way to get people into wine.
Yeah.
You know, it's a funny story. I actually learned a lot about that. Has any of you ever heard of Daryl Cordy?
No.
You can look him up afterwards. Daryl Cordy is one of the most world-renowned food and wine pairing people in the entire world, and he actually resides up here in Sacramento.
How do you spell his last name?
Cordy is Corti, and his first name is Daryl. That's Darell.
Thanks.
He's an asshole to deal with. I sell to him. He has the right to be. He speaks 7 languages. He's 87 years old, and he has tasted more wine and met more people in this journey of wine and food than I could ever even dream about. So he's very particular. He knows what he thinks he's looking for. Because he's got a clientele that trust him to be able to say, I think I'm going to make this taco, indigenous to this different style, from South America. And just on something as vague as that, he'll give you 8 or 9 different wine options to pair with it. And so he's got a whole blog and everything, and his story is great. So highly recommend looking him up, because he, as much as, again, he's an asshole, but I love him because he's a great mentor. He's got the history and he knows the experience. But anyway, he was the one that found Zinfandel in Amador County from those growers, the Devers, and introduced Bob Trinchero into the Zinfandel over there to put it into as a white Zin to market wine to California consumers. Because at that time, wine was still, this is around the whole bottle shock era, if you've watched the movie. Watch the movie Bottle Shock. It's great. It talks about the history of how California wine came on the map from Napa Vintners. You can find it on Amazon and Netflix, I believe. So anyway, Napa was growing wine, but there was a lot of other parts of the country, specifically the state of California, that were too. But everyone in California at that time just had this perception that if you drank wine, it was French wine or Italian wine. So to really get the California consumer actually as a consumer, they had to find a product that was great. And so that's why the Gallos came up with the wine coolers, and that's why Bob Trinchero came up with White Zinfandel. On top of Napa becoming Napa after winning and beating the French, and that was your elevated high-end wine. So you hit all consumers at that point. That was in the 60s.
I don't know, my great aunts developed wine coolers way before they were bottled.
I'm not surprised. I mean, talking to Brittany earlier, she's got family that's been doing their own bottling and moonshining for years. So everybody's been doing it. It's just not on a commercial level. The Gallos just were smart and put a label on it.
There you go.
Yeah, there really is just, I would ultimately, I would love to teach a class just on the history of California wine, because it really does extend back all the way down back to the gold rush, but didn't really take off until after World War II in the 1950s, 1960s specifically, where everyone actually understood that, hey, California is a world contender for some of the best wine in the world. It's a very cool thing. So back to kind of some wine pairings. I have some wines that I just like to show. So if you are ever shopping and you want to try them, these are all wines that are readily accessible, and they're just great to do. So I'm going to start with my big one first and then work my way into light. So this is the Brick Mason. This is a bottling out of Lodi that is done by a winery called Clinker Brick. This is a red blend. This is predominantly Zinfandel with a little Syrah, Petit Syrah, and Cabernet in it.
Nice.
Absolutely sensational if you do smoked meats like ribs. We did it with the smoked chicken a couple weeks ago, and it was lights out great because it is big enough to hold up to those smoky, savory flavors, but it's also not so heavy and not so over oaked that the chicken really was able to balance nicely with it. So that's a great option. Also with cheese, like if you ever do cheddar, if you like cheddar options, really, really great.
And what was the name again, please, real quick?
So this is a bottling called, it's called Brick Mason, but the winery is called Clinker Brick.
Clinker Brick.
Mason.
So Clinker Brick is a really great story. They are a 7-generation farming family. But in 2001, the family decided to open their own winery. They said, well, we've been selling grapes to everybody for 6 generations now. Why don't we try and make our own? So their average age of their vines are 120 years old for all their wines. In the state of California, actually in the United States, there's no legal law of defining old vines. So someone could have on their bottle old vine, and it could be 5 years old because there's no legal definition, but that person could say, hey, it's old to me. So really just always kind of check, you know, that's one of those label marketing terms that people always try and slide in as something to like hype up consumers. But it doesn't mean anything until you actually read the back label. And if they tell you how old the vines are, that would, I mean, 120 years is very old to me.
That'll do it.
Mitchell, where can
Another one, this is kind of a bigger brand. I'm sure everyone's heard of these guys. This is Cake Bread. This is their Pinot though. Cake Bread is obviously known, or maybe not obviously, Cake Bread is mostly known for their Chardonnay. The Cake Bread family founded their winery in the late 70s up in Napa. But they've kind of diversified a little bit. They now have property all the way up in Washington. This is out of the Anderson Valley. This is coming from 2 vineyards. This bottle specifically is called 2 Creeks because it comes from 2 vineyards on 2 different creeks. Kind of looking at its back label, again, kind of talking more on labels real quick. This is another phrase that a lot of people don't truly understand, I don't think, is the word estate. The United States has a different definition than in Europe. In Europe, estate means that the grapes have to grow on the exact same property that the winery is on. In the United States, that's not the case. I could own estate vines here in Sacramento, but my winery can be in Fresno. That's technically the very like stretch of the legal law. As long as I have a building on my vineyard that is somehow used for production, it's estate, even if the major winery is several hundred miles away. But that's ultimately the thing. Your production facility and the vineyards have to be in the same AVA. So Napa, Sonoma, those are 2 different AVAs. Paso, that's an AVA. But I mean, think how big they are.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you have a production facility of some extent, and again, California again doesn't really even monitor it that much. They allow you to leapfrog it even more.
So it doesn't really mean anything.
It doesn't really mean anything until you look at the label and it says estate grown and bottled. And then you know that if they're truly doing it all on the same property, because driving fruit from say here to Fresno, I mean, that's a few hour drive, and you know, I don't want my fruit driving down Highway 99 in the middle of the summer, you know, when it's 110, that's just going to turn my fruit into raisins. But if it's estate grown and bottled, you can pretty much assume that it's on a proximity that they're trying to get it all ready to go all in one shot. Their facilities, all their facilities. That's the thing. It's not that it's getting crushed and bottled all in one day. It's just the fact that all their facilities are in one spot.
And that's important because the traveling doesn't help the wine?
The traveling does not help wine. Traveling, again, you've got dirt, you've got dust, you've got road grudge, you've got heat.
Yeah.
If you want to harvest grapes in the earliest part of the morning where it's coolest, because basically at that point, the grapes are dormant. Grapes don't go through photosynthesis just like any other plant when it's not sunny out. So, you know, in those early mornings of the light, that acid and everything is basically like almost time frozen. So the sooner you get it off in the morning and then get it directly to your winery facility for crushing, destemming, pressing, what have you, that's a shorter period of time for any kind of extra sugar to occur into it or for its acidity to get washed out or whatnot. So again, it's not so much that it's a problem or a bad thing. It's just more of, you know, that the quality is really taken when it's right there from farm to winery kind of deal.
Okay. Mitchell?
Yeah.
Before you go on to the next one, that cake bread one, what would you pair that with food?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. So this Pinot, in my opinion, is a little bit bigger of a Pinot, but salmon is absolutely fantastic with this. Grilled salmon, specifically like a honey garlic glaze. But I could go all the way if I wanted to do like a turkey burger or even just a regular like beef patty burger. It could go both directions. If you wanted just something light and not wanting to go full food, sushi bites are great, like California rolls, as well as even like your aged Gouda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, yeah, if you're especially like party platter, ideas like little apps, little bites. Pinots are great because they are very versatile, in my opinion. Nuts, you could go cashews, almonds, pistachios with Pinot. You can do pretty much any of those mid kind of firm cheeses. Nothing too aged or too smoked out. Like smoked Gouda is like kind of that very far extreme for me with Pinot. But that mid-quality cheese would always be really good with Pinot.
So like a charcuterie board, Pinots would be really good with that.
Charcuterie boards, lights out. I'll eat your entire charcuterie board in 5 minutes while drinking probably.
My wife is a charcuterie champion.
Then yeah, Pinot and you should be good.
Pinot is good. Okay.
Because when you then talk your meats, like your different salami types and different hams. I mean, again, salamis can be really rich. But Pinots, depending on where it's from, like this Anderson Valley one, it's very rich as well. So you want that richness with richness kind of pairing. Steve, that answer your question?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you.
Perfect. So moving back up, this is Chateau Minuni. So this is out of the Côte de Provence, so southern France. Minuni holds themselves as the luxury and the highlight of what the rich and famous should be drinking in their life. This is the rosé of the city of Monaco by brand. So these guys, this is one of their kind of very easy bottles to be able to purchase because it's like $12, $14 on a retail shelf, but they have a rosé that is $100 a bottle, which is absolutely crazy to me, but I've never tasted it. So I guess I can't judge it. But absolutely elegant, really cool history. They've been around for about 200 years. The estate itself, again, their estate is property, vineyards. And they do probably about 100,000 cases get brought into the US every year. So as far as exports go, that's pretty small. With rosés, again, you can go your salmon route, you can go your sushi route, your shellfish, any of those kind of seafood entities. But I also really like rosé with chicken as well as lamb. Because rosé has enough acid with that gaminess of the lamb. It sounds weird, but like a lamb rack, with that bright acid and floral scent of the rosé, it's really, really nice.
Cool.
What do you guys normally like pairing with rosé? Rosé is always kind of the fun one.
Anything that needs a crispness and, to cut I like it for even things that have a high fat, like sometimes that lamb and stuff like that, it cuts it a bit.
Yeah, totally. Perfect. So it is summertime. I know I was kind of ragging on them earlier, but this is Trinquero. This is one of their single vineyard estates. This is their Mary's vineyard. This is their Sauvignon Blanc. So Trinquero, as much as they're out in the world and they're huge, they do still manage and procure and proctor some of the best vineyards in Napa. And they are they do a great job with it. This Sauvignon Blanc specifically does go through some oak, so it does have a little bit more of a rounder kind of body to it. It's not so floral and it's not so New Zealand green. So this makes it just really nice just to hang out and sip on. But again, white wines to me are any kind of fresh fruit, seafood, hanging out, patio. And again, just really cool, good Sauvignon Blanc. These are just kind of general things that I just had. Not drinking all of these tonight, but I, would love.
Good.
And then, Ayala, the champagne. One of the oldest champagne houses. This is actually now owned by Domaine Bollinger, their champagne house, but they are independently operated. First champagne house to have a woman as the head winemaker, is what's called over there the Chef de Caves. Very progressive for everyone's time, which is awesome. It's very finesse. It's very light, crisp. Oysters, anything with that salinity. Do you guys like oysters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No? Yes, yes, no.
Mhm.
Yes, no.
Oysters with champagne are like one of the best things in the entire world to me. But again, I'm a big champagne guy, and I could drink champagne with any part of any meal with any kind of food pairing, I feel.
Me too.
It just works. Obviously, depending on the champagne house, there's more champagne houses that have more Pinot. So I want something a little bit more muscular, or something that's more Chardonnay, which is very, very sophisticated, very much more finesse. Just depends. Steve, have I answered all kind of getting into your ideas for hosting people and making sure to have wine?
Yes, I appreciate that because it helps to have more concrete like names, what you've just done in
Mhm.
pairings with someone who may not know what to get. Can you give me a range of what these might cost price-wise?
Yeah, so the Brick Mason you can find for about $12 to $15.
Nice price.
Okay, that's not bad at all.
No. Cake bread, this Pinot, this is going to be definitely up there more in like your $80 range.
$80. Ooh, okay.
Another great Pinot though, if you are looking for much more just easy Pinots, A to Z out of Oregon makes really good Pinot. It's not as Oregon-esque, so it's not as like the coffee and lighter kind of tea kind of flavors. It's a little bit more of the darker kind of red fruits with those integrated. And you can find a bottle of A to Z Pinot for like $10 to $15.
Okay.
It's not going to be as full body. It's a little bit lighter body Pinot.
Okay.
Chateau Minuti here, this bottling is again going to be in that $10 to $15 range.
Okay.
The Trinchero Mary's Vineyard, again, I love it to death, but I know it's not a lot of people's because again, this is almost $45.
Okay.
Sauvignon Blanc, that if you're looking again, that kind of 10 to 15 mark. Joel Gott makes a pretty good Sauvignon Blanc even. That's a pretty simple, very classic California style Sauvignon Blanc.
Joe who?
Joel Gott.
Oh, Joel.
Yeah. You got them. Or if you do want to try something with a little bit more of like that passion fruit style kiwi, there's some really nice ones out of New Zealand. Now I'm losing my brain. Chasing Venus is a really good one. And again, that's maybe going to be about $10 for that bottle.
Okay.
The Ayala champagne, $50.
Okay.
True champagne, I can't really find any in any market I've ever been able to find anything less than $30. Even great houses that are here domestically like Schramsberg, Domaine Carneros, and Iron Horse are going to be anywhere from $30 up. But say like this bottle right here that I have with my shrimp and french fries, that's a $10 bottle of Blanc de Blanc, 100% Chardonnay out of Italy. It's labeled though as Prosecco. So Prosecco typically is going to be much more inexpensive, but the method of how it's made is much more inexpensive. The cost can very much be equated into quality with champagne. So when you're looking at bubbles, if you're wanting to stay under that $20 mark, my recommendation to you is always to look on the label to make sure it says method traditional, because then you know that the secondary fermentation, which gives it the bubbles, is done in the bottle versus in a tank, or if it's artificially injected with CO2.
Okay. Now, okay, again, another novice question. So I've heard Prosecco and I've heard of champagne. So what's the difference?
So Prosecco technically is made in Italy, specifically in the Veneto region. And there are certain designated zones that Prosecco is allowed to be made. Champagne is a region specifically in France. But the biggest difference besides those is how it's actually made. Champagne is done in what's called traditional method. So that secondary fermentation is done in the bottle itself. So they take a wine, still wine, and then that's already fermented, it's already wine, and then they put it in a bottle with additional yeast and sugar, and then they cap it and let it do its secondary fermentation. Versus Prosecco, they'll take a wine out of a tank, and then they'll just put it into a secondary pressurized tank, and that's how, and that method is called Charmat. And so that's how they do it. They're basically bigger batch. It's made to be consumed a lot younger than champagne is. And it's a little bit more lively and fresh, but the bubbles are significantly bigger, and the carbonation that happens out of it is a little bit more, not diluted, intense. So when it does get popped out of the bottle, it goes very, very quickly. Then you've got other wines that are like Aussie Spumante, which is a little sweet. Or there's products like
Cava. What about Cava?
How about Cava?
Cava is out of Spain. And Cava is actually done secondary method. Cava's fantastic, great. I totally spaced on that. Cava is done the exact same way champagne is. So really fine bubbles, but the grape varietals are a little bit different because they're Spanish indigenous varietals. Some Cava houses now have progressed up into using Chardonnay as well. But most of them are indigenous varietals like Vera or anything like that grow in the Barcelona area. That's where Cava mostly is out of. And then you've got Cremants, so sparkling out of anywhere else in France, but Champagne. And those are also going to give you great value because they're done the exact same. They're held to the same standards as Champagne. They're just not in the Champagne region. So you could have Cremant out of Burgundy. You could have Cremant out of Bordeaux. You could have Cremant out of Provence. Or the Loire Valley. And yeah, those are great for that $10 to $20 range.
What are some more Pinots in the, under $30 range?
Yeah, so again, you've got A to Z. Man, now my brain is Niner. I actually have a picture of that.
Okay, we like
Niner is great. This brand here that I have they make this bottling is their Valdegay, which is a Italian varietal, but they do make a Pinot that is lovely as well out of Sonoma, and that's about $20.
Where is that? What's that again?
Tilth is the winery. They're based in Napa, but they do source fruit out of Sonoma, and it's about a $20, $25 bottle of Pinot.
Okay.
Niner's about that same price category. There are some very inexpensive bottles of Burgundy that are unclassified, that are lights out, because a lot of times places like, say, Jadot here, they have all their fruit that they initially picked from these Grand Cru vineyards in Burgundy, which are getting hundreds of dollars a bottle. Well, they have leftover juice because they're setting themselves only to producing so many bottles. So then they bottle an unclassified bottle of just Burgundy. And you can find it for 10 to 20 bucks. It's a great bottling, but you also do realize that, it's 300,000 bottles that are probably going to be made in that bottling versus the, maybe 2,700 cases that are made of that Grand Cru. So it's not bad. It's just understanding that that's probably what that is. Adelsheim here, also out of Oregon, they make sensational Pinot and Chardonnay. Absolutely cool. This is a bottle of their Pinot Grigio. Substance, this is made by, I'm blanking hard here. We'll come back to that one. Mountain Beautiful, they're out of New Zealand. This is a Riesling. If you like really dry, crisp Riesling, another amazing varietal to have during the summertime. There is just a hint of that sweetness, which is more like a honeycomb, but dry Riesling can be paired with some of the coolest things. Again, shrimp, avocado, any of that kind of creamy fattiness, because there is that acid with it. Really, really good. Beaujolais, that's kind of that bar part to Pinot. Let's see, I was thinking of other Pinots here. Down out of not San Luis Obispo, but Santa Barbara area, you've got Babcock Cellars. You've got they've got several bottlings that are under that $20. Aubon Clemence, also out of Santa Maria, they have that $20 to $30 bottle price category. Sonoma Cutrer, if you're in an independent wine shop like the Market or Sam's Deli, they would have their bottling of Estate Pinot, which is really tasty. Their Chardonnay is nice as well, if it's their Russian River ranches. So yeah, those are any other kind of wines that you guys kind of are looking label or varietals that you want to kind of look out for and give you some label ideas?
No, you've given us some really good ideas, and I want to try more Pinot now. I've decided.
Pinot's great. You know, it takes people a long time to get into Pinot because it typically does have a little bit higher acidity. So it's not, you know, that initial like, oh, I could drink this bottle real fast. But once people get into Pinot, there's a reason why the most expensive wine in the world is Pinot Noir. Yeah,
and I was surprised. You know, I like the big full body, but we took a tour in Willamette Valley.
Yeah,
and, you know, that's all they had. It seemed like.
Yeah, there. You know, you've got Penner-Ash up there. You've got Siduri up there. Again, Adelsheim is up there. Yeah, there's. I roughly represent about 4,000 different labels. So when all of a sudden someone's asking me for labels and I'm not staring at my book, it's difficult to try and figure out, how many, which ones. But at the end of this, I really just want to let you guys try. Hopefully my biggest takeaway is there's so much wine in the world. Never let anyone or yourself go, I don't want to try that because it's not what I know. Always try it. Like, if you've got a $10 budget, there's so many wines at $10. If you got a $100 budget, there's a ton of wines at a $100 budget, you know, like, you know, and if you're willing to compromise and say, oh, I'm going to grab a bottle of this that I know I like and a bottle, it's always great. One of the favorite things, Steve, I know with you talking about hosting, one of the coolest things that I've kind of gotten to do, and it's not new by any means, is I love doing tasting. So I'll buy, you know, 8 or 9 bottles of the same varietal, or say the same vintage, but different varietals, just so people can taste either that year, that varietal, and I'll black bag them or I'll brown paper bag them. And just basically do a blind tasting on everybody and just see what their favorite is. Because it's fun. It gets people interactive. It gets people understanding going. Because then there's no label snobbery at all involved, you know? Because if you have friends over that are somewhat pretentious about it, again, I have them. Here, oh, you thought you liked that bottle? Well, actually, you said that was the worst one of the flight.
Yeah, we've had that happen.
It's fun to do those blind tastings and have people rank them by price.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
The
nice.
wine snobs, it's fun to see what they do with that.
Absolutely. When I was teaching classes at Total Wine in Fresno, it was unreal to me the amount of people that would come in and go, well, what are we pouring? Well, I just wasted $20. I only drank some, you know, wine over $50. And it's like, yeah, sure you do. What wines do you normally like? And they're like, oh, this and that. And then you blind them on something and they're like, oh, well, that was $10, sir.
Yeah, that's a very fun thing to do.
Yeah,
That's a cool idea. I like that.
Yeah, price, it's all about perception, you know. People are very ingrained into what is the perceived value, but at the end of the day, it's if you like it, you like it. Again, I'm not trashing some of those brands earlier, but I mean, there are certain people ask me all the time, well, why don't you like this, or why do you? Well, for me, it's not so much the price, it's more I understand in what the winemaking might go through. I don't like supporting wineries that use a lot of additional artificial additives and flavors. I want to have the wine speak for itself, that natural understanding of that wine is that wine, you know? So it's just fun to be able to taste.
That's cool.
And that's actually my last slide. It wasn't really anything crazy because I wanted it to be as much questions and as much free flow as possible from
It's
you.
great.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's my thank you.
Yay.
But is anybody got any other questions on anything? I mean, you guys got me for just a little bit longer here, until Brittany says I have to sign off and go away.
So Mitchell, on that tasting, do you do like all a Pinot, or you do, and you do different levels of prices, or do you mix it up?
I mix it up. It depends on who I have over.
Okay.
If it's like my parents who grew up wine tasting out in their back door and love wine, but don't really understand and don't really care about the winemaking particulars of it. They just want good wine. I'll more often than not just pour, a couple glasses for them and then just have them blind taste and base it on the food pairing itself. So I'll put a couple blind glasses out and then a couple different food options and see what their best pairing is that they like. And then we'll go from there for their deal,
Okay.
Some people, I just did a Riesling tasting. I did 5 different 2015 Rieslings from all over the world. So I did one from Washington and one from California, New Zealand, all sauce, basically just to show that year, and just the different criteria, but we did it with the same food. So it was really interesting and cool to see everyone's expression on, oh, this style out of this country is this is out of this. There's so many fun ways to play with it.
That's cool.
And you do become the life of, like, everyone ultimately, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, but everyone starts wanting to come to your house for, the party ultimately. In college, everyone just has, the house that just has the red Solo cups and the 30 pack of Coors Light. Yeah, that's probably cool and all, but that's everyone's last resort versus you go to someone else's house and they have the pre-made margarita mix and, the mojitos out.
Hey, we hand make our margarritas. We
Exactly.
Make our Coors
See,
Lights. We hand
Everybody's
make
going to
our
your
margaritas.
house. No one's coming to my house if
We
I just
have
have
her
Coors Light on the table.
Yeah, we have Brittany's recipe.
I know. I made a batch because everyone asked me for it for like 4th of July, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just make a batch." And then I ended up making like a 4-gallon pitcher. It was pretty entertaining.
You are ready to entertain.
There you go.
There we go. Well, real quick, I'm gonna stop recording, but you guys
Okay.
can continue chatting. But if we go over a certain amount of time, then it takes forever for it to process. So I'm gonna stop.
And then Brittany,
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
no, are you done recording?